Welcome to another episode of Behind the Build. Today we have Sal from Escape Velocity Ventures. Escape Velocity Ventures is a thesis-driven early stage investment firm for DePIN and broadly decentralized wireless. And the background of Sal, he invested in early and growth stage crypto and fintech businesses at Ribbit Capital. And yeah, Sal to me is a mentor, a close friend. He's helped me grow a lot and progress kind of in finding my purpose in this field. So yeah, Sal, happy to have you on here, man. If you kind of just want to give an intro and we can get into things.
Thanks, Sean. You're gonna make me shed a tear. Um, no, thanks for the intro, guys, and I'm super glad to be here on Behind the Build. Um, I think you covered it pretty well, Sean. I have been an investor for my whole career, and now I run a fund called Escape Velocity with the partner named Mahesh, and we focus on investing in early stage decentralized infrastructure projects. Which, if you think of crypto as like computers that or a blockchain as a computer that can make a commitment, we invest in infrastructure that can make commitments, and so anyone with a private key can contribute to building their own wireless network or contribute to stabilizing the energy grid or deliver food for your neighbors or other sorts of economic activity. And so we invest behind founders that are building the rails to enable that to happen permissionlessly and trustlessly. And we've been doing this for almost a year and a half now. Um, we work with a lot of the leading crypto and non-crypto investors to support our companies, and have invested in 7 or 8 companies now at this point, which I'm sure we can talk about. But XNET was one of our first investments, and also one of our biggest. And it's been really a pleasure to work with you guys and learn about neutral host, about the industry, about launching a token, and a whole bunch of other things along the way.
That's awesome. Yes, Sal, I remember our first time meeting when you were still at Ribbit, having a lunch in Palo Alto, and you're trying to figure out this whole space. I'm just curious, is there a singular kind of 0 to 1 light bulb moment for you where these ideas really click? Some single thing you can reference?
It wasn't a moment, but I feel like the era of I'm sure all the three of us actually experienced this in late 2020 with helium, where it just felt like 3 months of my life were like blurred over by just like getting as involved with helium as I could in every sense of the word. I think that's probably when we first grabbed lunch in Palo Alto. But yeah, it was, I think getting so involved in the helium community during that pace of growth opened our eyes to what was possible in terms of sort of like permissionless and trustless collaboration between people. And we would have never expected I guess the learning from me was, I was a big Bitcoin maximalist for a long time. And the thing I love about the Bitcoin industry from an investing perspective is that it industrialized faster than almost any other industry on earth. Like the margins in the Bitcoin mining industry went from really fat margins to like, you need like a hyper telescope to be able to see the margins like in basically a decade. And DeWi, with helium, we saw like the potential opportunity to do the same. It's like the efficiency, new businesses sprung up really quickly around the helium ecosystem to go deploy radios, to build software, to manage deployments of radios, to build use cases on top, to get involved in like governance and gamification and a whole bunch of other things. And so it was really that 3, 4, 5 month period of getting involved with the helium ecosystem. For me, it was part of diligencing from an investment perspective, but yeah, led me to really like viscerally experience the power of incentives and how quickly the helium community was growing, and also just meet a bunch of people, including you guys, who, as investors, the number one signal is just talent. The leading indicator is really talent flows, and so whenever you feel like you see something non-consensus with a bunch of smart people going to work on some area that sounds weird, it always, for us at least, we tend to focus on those types of problems.
Yeah, that's awesome, Sal. Building off of that, right? That 3, 4 month period that you talked about, it wasn't really a 0 to 1 moment. A bunch of things were happening all together. But I'm a firm believer in just like the research and data you have, then you can like go and extrapolate and actually find out what the problem, and then obviously build the product after that. So I think like during that time, I think Escape Velocity, specifically you and Mahesh, I guess you guys were still in stealth mode with the actual venture side of things. But you guys had a lot of kind of critical pieces of research that I think kind of molded people's perspectives and just shaped like the market opportunities in DeWi. So first of all, thank you for that. I think it took us all a long way. And then if you kind of want to talk about just some high level takeaways from that, right? Like from your perspective, why is DeWi a better model for building 5G, especially than traditional wireless in America?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like something we learn more about every day. The From a really, really big picture perspective, like I think of these things called, or I call them like undeniable arrows of progress, like things that are really obvious that they'll happen over time. You just don't know when. For the telecom industry, that's shared infrastructure, right? Like for in the early 2000s, all the telcos owned their own like towers. Turns out that building 3 times as many towers is less efficient than building 1 times as many towers and sharing it. Like, who would have thought? But the industry dynamics, the incentives eventually moved to a place where the towers are owned by third parties. They're shared among the different telcos, and the returns on capital are much more efficient, and coverage ends up better because more people can access the same real estate. Um, so that's one critical, that's one critical piece of telco, meaning the real estate that we saw go from unshared to shared in the early 2000s. The second critical piece is spectrum, like the actual permission from the government to transmit radio waves over a certain frequency and power. And spectrum, similarly, today is actually mostly closed. There are spectrum auctions that the government holds. There's one bidder that typically wins, and they have sole use over that band of spectrum, whether or not they're actually using it at any given point in time. In 2020, it was something that was in the works for a while, but in 2020, it actually happened. The U.S. Government released the first band of shared spectrum called CBRS, and so this was sort of like the second domino to fall. We used to have before spectrum, you could only one person could use each band. Now you have the possibility for many people to share spectrum, and just like in the real estate example, like it's things are more efficient when you share things, and utilization goes higher. And so we saw CBRS or shared spectrum in the U.S. really showing a pathway for that piece of the puzzle. And the last piece is radios, right? You need like someone to put the radios, you need the radios, and then you need permission to operate the radios, and that's the spectrum. But the radios also have always been, even today, now we have shared towers, but Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile have different radios stacked on top of the same tower. Whereas realistically, you could have, maybe 2 radios instead of 3 and have them share capacity, and it would be better for everybody. But the incentives don't allow for that in the traditional method. And so Helium was the first time that we saw very obviously, like, okay, you can also share a radio network between many people as long as everyone has a private key and you have some open source protocol on how to sort of how to allocate the rewards and prevent gaming. It's not simple, but it might be possible. And so this is basically DeWi takes every asset that you need to go into a telco network, and it makes it shared instead of proprietary. And that makes the whole system more efficient, and results in a better experience for customers and better coverage and everything else. And so at a really, really high level, when I just, think about how do I think about the undeniability that DeWi will eventually win? It's that if you just share infrastructure, it's fundamentally more efficient, and that it's really that simple. And just creating the protocols to make sure that sharing is fair is like the really hard work that we try to do every day. But in my mind, it's unambiguous that that sharing things makes it more efficient. And so that's what we're trying to build behind.
Yeah, I like that sort of first principles thinking, the undeniable arrows of progress, and apply that to the telco industry. And shared infrastructure is one of those undeniable. It's like signs of progress. So speaking more into the way like a decentralized wireless landscape is emerging, you're seeing a couple different models, like a direct to consumer, and then sort of the direct to, where you have potentially millions of customers versus other models where there's only a handful of customers, like an MNO. That'd be kind of a neutral host model. I'm curious on your thinking of these two models. Are those the only two? And then, XNET is firmly in one camp versus the other. Is there a reason, that you bet on XNET when it comes down to the different approaches for decentralized wireless?
Yeah. For us, like along this theme of undeniable arrows of progress, like the fact that radio networks will be shared is sort of this, the undeniable fact. And so the neutral host model that XNET has, I'm sure everyone here listening to it probably knows, but neutral host is just a telco term for sharing radios. Um, and well, it goes a little bit deeper than that. You share some of the software on the radios as well, but at a high level, it's sharing radios between different operators. And the this inevitability meant that we just had to find a way for it to actually become possible. Like, how do you create a system in which folks can share radios? And to do that, you have to have enough demand to support the build outs of these radios. And building demand is really, really difficult in any two-sided marketplace, in any crypto network, in any business. If you're competing for the same 24 hours of attention that everyone has, and trying to get them to use your product. And so the XNET model is kind of like gives away the entire customer management part of the stack and just focuses exclusively on building coverage or capacity in areas where it doesn't exist today. And we think this is like the very targeted, like, pin needle, like hitting the exact right pain point for the industry, which is there are areas that aren't covered today or don't have capacity today where customers demand it, where the real estate owners would be happy to get paid for providing connectivity there, and where there's actually like people that know how to build networks around it. Like there might be an ISP, or there might be someone like Steve, or just a hobby. Like there's a bunch of people that now can build radio networks, but it's a very hard matching problem to tie it all together. And so when we saw the XNET model with sort of a mobile core that's already natively interoperable with the telco ecosystem, and a specific like core focus on neutral host, for us that's the highest leverage sort of like place to invest, because with a very small amount of capital you can go and build clusters and prove out that the space can have real demand, and after that hopefully the network can finance itself. And so that's a little bit on neutral host. Some of the other models or layers of the stack, you can take the MVNO approach, which I think is also can be quite exciting. And from an investing perspective, at least in any business where you like own the customer, you're in a position of power because you can drive the customer to wherever you sort of want them to go and take a commission. And so there's a couple of businesses. There's Really Wireless in Austin. There's Peter Adderton, the guy from Boost Mobile, or the founder of Boost Mobile, is starting an MVNO. Helium has their MVNO that they're launching. Who else? A company called Ifani that does a lot of cool work around SIM swap protection. There is a company in Hawaii that the name escapes me, but has an MVNO as well. I'm talking independent MVNOs outside of the telco ownerships. And so this model is effectively, we're going to do the customer support and customer acquisition for you, and we're going to hand off the entire rest of the process. So then an MVNO technically doesn't own any actual network or radio footprint. It can be sort of an entire UI-based layer, customer management layer on top. And so this is another model that's in DeWi. The last one I would say is, these two are mainly focused on mobile internet. Fixed internet is fundamentally a different, it's just a game changer, right? Mobile, you connect person to person, and fixed internet, you connect place to place. And so it's a fundamentally different like architecture that you take to build these sorts of networks. And we've invested behind a couple of fixed wireless providers that are experimenting with how to decentralize different parts of the stack to provide home internet to folks. So that was a lot, but I'll pause there on just the general overview of the different strategies that folks are taking in DeWi.
Right on. Yeah, the third fixed stack is definitely an important distinction, and another plays another role in this whole connectivity landscape.
Yeah, it plays another role, and I think at least the model that XNET embodies, like working directly with some of these fixed wireless providers, some of the internet service providers, obviously because they already have access to real estate assets, top tier locations, but it also kind of enables this whole building of heterogeneous networks, which I think is going to be huge going into the future. I know Tom always hits on it, Steve. It's like yeah, sure, you want the mobile stack on the roof, but then what if you can include carrier grade Wi-Fi? There's like 3, 4. I know other MSPs are building IoT networks as well. So I think the concept of heterogeneous networks and like kind of how we're building in clusters where the demand is, where the most people are, is definitely the way to go. I mean, we're all trying to get to the back to the flywheel, right? How do we get to 1 million nodes? How do we expand from the US to other countries? So I think that's the eventual goal, but just a matter of when.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I feel like a lot of or people in the telco industry know, but I certainly didn't know it a couple of years back, is that there a lot of the industry is structured around this arb that mobile data is like 50 times more expensive than fixed data. Like if you send a gigabyte to your house, you probably pay like literally 2% of what you would pay if you send it over a mobile network. And so there's like in the crypto way of thinking, this is like a currency peg or something. Like eventually everyone will try to arb this away. And that's kind of what carrier grade Wi-Fi is, one representation of that. There will be many more, but eventually from a big picture, like, we're going to see the convergence of those two things. It's not, this is what you mentioned around heterogeneous networks. Like you really want to build for the demand. It shouldn't necessarily matter whether, it should matter, but a 50x difference is like a little absurd. And so certainly that spread will change over time, where likely mobile data gets a lot cheaper, which requires the telcos to be less profitable or improve their efficiency, and something like DeWi, or fixed wireless data gets more expensive, which has certainly not been the trend for the past 35 years or 25 years, and I'd be surprised if it flipped now.
Yeah, very good point. And you touched on this sort of learning journey that you've experienced in telco, because I don't know how you feel. Telco is not exactly intuitive. Their product is something which just works, right? Which is connectivity, no matter what device, or however you interface, and you touch the same internet no matter where. But how it arrives is very different and takes a different journey. I'm just curious if there's been other learnings about the telco industry, whether it's the tech stack or the competitive dynamics, that you can touch on as you've done a really intense deep dive in the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's a solid question. I guess two different angles I'll mention. One is from a financial perspective. I actually think it's like dead simple. Like if you just take the three telcos and add up their financials and look at where the cash has gone over 5 years, like you'll be very worried about the state of their business, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do that. And so I think part of it is just like people, blind their eyes or have been in the industry so long they don't realize, like, if you look at from first principles, that the model doesn't really work if you extrapolate the trends a little bit further out. And so understanding the financials of just like these are like globally systemic, or let me put it this way. One of the first things that got us really excited about DeWi is when we were first starting the fund was we went around and tried to figure out like what are the industries. We were trying to define infrastructure. Basically, somebody asked us what is infrastructure. We had no idea what to say. So I went around the world and said, how much government ownership is there in different industries? Trying to, obviously you can't fully estimate this, but you can get an idea of like money supply is the number one, right? Like we used to have private monies in the US and abroad. Now the government, basically everywhere in the world, there's very little private money. It's all public money. And so I think of money as the best use case for crypto, where governments have like 99.5% market share, or 99.9 or something like that. The next two are energy and telecommunications. Like globally, the energy, I mean, in China, the government owns like the entire thing, but in many other countries globally, the energy industry is like, depending on how you look at it, 30 to 50% owned by public entities, by the government. And this for us was a sign of like, okay, this is, if you were going to start a new country, like what would you try to build? And that this is kind of the mental model we took towards, well, you would probably build an energy grid, you would build a wireless network. And in fact, this is like exactly what governments have maintained control over even after like many decades. And so for us, that was an understanding of I think you can't necessarily think of telcos as rational businesses because they play such a big part of the national economy, and they're so concentrated that it's effectively government stopped or backdropped or owned. And so the incentives of how these businesses operate is like they're very slow. There's no innovation. The average, like it's impossible to find someone who's like working hard inside a telco. It's very, very hard, or like has a lot of ambition. and those people tend to like leave pretty quickly. So yeah, a bunch of learnings, but basically I'd summarize it as governments actually have a lot of control over the telco industry, whether it's direct ownership or pseudo ownership or buying spectrum and having like rights to the cash and or having leverage control with the FCC. It's quite systemically important. And two, like the talent, yeah, there's a huge like kind of like stagnant base of talent that, in my opinion, is just clipping a coupon off the telecom industry, but isn't really innovating at all. And so gave us more conviction in the opportunity of, the people are like very much asleep at the wheel. So we are competing against them.
That's a lens I've never examined telco, but it kind of viewing them as a utility or sort of an arm of the government is actually, things sort of make more sense under that perspective.
I mean, if you look at how they operate their business, like they're not business, like a rational owner operator of a business would not operate there like with as much leverage or with as short of a short-term time horizon or taking out as much cash as those companies do. So yeah, if you try to understand the core mechanics, I think it's really it's government control and it's a utility, and also like a huge amount of pension like dollars are telcos from or dividends from telcos. And so yeah, there's a lot behind the scenes, I think, that impacts why the industry looks the way it does today.
I think it's a good segue for maybe Sean's question next.
Yeah, no, it was, because in there somewhere Sal mentioned this idea, right, of starting your new country. What's the infrastructure? This is kind of a deviation from, I guess, the conversation, but I guess it's more of a focus on macro conditions, right? Because it's not just deep in like overall kind of this Web3 crypto space. Bitcoin needs more adoption. So yeah, I mean, obviously Balaji, ex Coinbase, came out. I think it was a few months ago now when the run on SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, happened with his $1 million Bitcoin bet, right? And I know, Sal, you're a Bitcoin maxi, or were in the past. So kind of want to talk about the idea and the ideas behind a network state, how Balaji defines it. Obviously, technology has allowed us to start new companies, new communities, and new currencies. But again, feeding back into the idea, can technology allow us to create a new city or a new country, right? So kind of want to get your thoughts on the network state, maybe the macro outlook of Bitcoin. I have this like interesting chart that Balaji actually presented in one of his talks. It shows kind of like the fiat market capitalizations in Bitcoin. And I'm sure you've seen this, but it's right. It's sandwiched between Singapore and Vietnam right now. So I think this idea that like a virtual currency or something made in the digital world and bringing that into the physical and creating a whole community around it that has like this sense of national consciousness is a great idea. And more importantly, I think deepen, right, this whole industry could have a whole role to play in it if it's possible, because obviously these new network states are going to need infrastructure, mobile service, energy grids. So that was a lot, but Sal, if you want to kind of just give your breakdown on network states, the macro condition with crypto, would love to hear it.
Yeah, I missed this day in crypto VC class, I guess, but I actually haven't read much of Balaji stuff about networks. I think I understand from the context what he means. The way I mean, I think of like sovereignty of individuals, and it's the same kind of exercise that I talked about earlier about like what do governments own. Money supply is the core thing, and then energy and telecommunications and transportation networks and health networks are like the then number like 2 and 3, and then 4 and 5 respectively, in like those buckets of infrastructure that people need to build their lives, and that governments, the pessimistic view is like this is what governments use to hold power over you, is like access to these systems. And so I don't know. I do think I just think it'll happen from the inside out. Like governments, I think governments will somewhere around the world will invest in deep in projects, or they'll create deep in projects in their own jurisdictions, and then some of those may combine across different countries and take on a life of its own or something else. If network state means like we're gonna buy an island and like all move there and build like a wireless and energy network there, I mean, it can happen, but that's like a study in like how to build cults. I mean, that's just like you need like a very strong human personality to get people to like sacrifice their entire lives. I don't think it's not necessarily a technology or like philosophy or crypto problem. You just like that's just a cult. So I think it's more likely to happen from the inside out, right? Like if you think about like what's the US, if you like picture the US in your mind, it's like, you know, very, very big and weighty. If you picture like the like government apparatus of like Venezuela or Zimbabwe, it's like, you know, it can change from day to night. Like you really don't know what's going to be there tomorrow when you wake up. So there's a lot less strength in them, which means that I think people will be a lot more willing to go and use decentralized networks.
Yeah.
It's already happened, for example, like in Africa, where there's mobile money, like in Zimbabwe, where when there was hyperinflation, people used airtime. Like they sold, you know, money from the out there. The telcos and the payment trails are sort of one and the same, and people just adopted to using airtime through these like apps as their currency because it's a fixed sort of a supply amount type of like asset, and that was the only thing that they had access to. So if you create the networks that work, I very much believe over time, like the trend is giving citizens back their sovereignty. But I honestly have been a little bit confused by the network state, or I just haven't done enough reading on it, so I'm not exactly sure what Balaji means when he says network state.
I mean, yeah, that's essentially it. What he said in a nutshell. It's just like making a community even self-sovereign. Obviously, Balaji takes it to kind of the extremes where the idea you said you can move to island and start your own currency, start your own government. But I think he's just alluding to kind of like the macro pressures, right? There's like a lot of push-pull happening around the world, riots, governments like threatening to overthrow. I mean, El Salvador, right? I think the point you touched on, the inside out thing, was pretty insightful because El Salvador, if I'm not mistaken, is one of those countries that have adopted Bitcoin more freely. So that's like somewhere where it could happen, right? Like from the inside out, they set up a completely new infrastructure just due to the demands of their new kind of political state and whatnot. So I think that'd be cool to see.
Agree. I will say though, it's way harder than it looks. Even like El Salvador, I was there a year and a half-ish ago or something like that, and after they had already rolled out the Bitcoin sort of the Chivo wallet, I think it's called, they did sort of an airdrop where anyone could claim with like your social security number equivalent, you could claim a $20 airdrop for getting your Chivo wallet. And you know, similar to the US, like it's not that hard to get mass lists of social security numbers. And so basically like what happened was all these things got botted to hell as happens in crypto. But even on a government scale, like, you know, they weren't able to solve it like this, which is why I'm a little bit skeptical of the network state idea. But anyways, I think a very small portion of actually like people that downloaded the Chivo wallet or people in El Salvador are actually using Bitcoin because of this problem of we couldn't even actually just like get wallets into people's hands, and they sort of fumbled the bag there.
Got it. Yeah, these are big questions, and I think correspondingly big time horizons. Maybe let's talk about EV3. You guys sort of famously take a long time horizon, and I'm curious what the next decade looks like for you. And maybe you can just talk about your philosophy and taking long-term vision, long-term bets, and then also just what might be coming up on the roadmap for EV3. You just launched a Dobbs board. Maybe you have a foundation or grant arm in the works. You can speak a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, your first question was the more fun one, so I'll take it. I'll take it first. Warren Buffett was my investing. I feel like I quote Buffett every time I'm with Steve, so you're probably pissing you off by now. But I always felt that like if you take a longer time horizon, you just eliminate most of the competition. And honestly, starting a venture firm has made me like 10x my conviction in that this is true. Like most people are just fundamentally playing short-term games. And to run a business, you kind of have to, like, you can't always operate in the clouds, but also I think that balance of having a long-term mindset can just cause you to do, you know, different things that can be very profitable and just waiting. So it's always been we've always been like, you know, try to be contrarians and try to make high conviction bets, and timing is hard to get right. Like I even, you know, for this idea of like inevitability of arrows of progress, I'm pretty certain, like the way you or I interact with computers, like it used to be a huge mainframe, and then it was a desktop, and then it was a laptop on your lap, and then it was a phone in your pocket, and now it's like a smartwatch. Next, it's going to be in your brain. Like the fact that the distance between like the device and your body is gonna, like the intimacy is gonna keep getting shorter and shorter, is like an inevitable arrow of progress. Now, does that mean we want to go in like that in the next couple of years? Like brain chips are going to work? That's a much different that's a much different bet. And so I think when you take a longer time horizon, you're just able to do more ambitious things, and that's what makes it fun for us. Um, in terms of what we'll look like in 10 years, I mean, for us, it's all about supporting founders. Hopefully, a couple of our companies will go on to be really successful, and there will be millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, maybe a billion people using infrastructure that is built by our companies, and it's really the biggest measure of success for us. Like we're of course a venture fund and our returns oriented and everything else. But if you imagine a world in 10 years where a billion people are using some sort of infrastructure from a company we backed, I think we'll be doing fine. And so we're just trying to partner with people that have similar mentalities and are ready to put in a decade of work to try to make something happen, and support them as much as we can. So that's more or less our approach to venture. What do we have coming up next? I've had a lot of fun over the past couple of months building some tools for the DePIN community that we're going to start putting more emphasis on going forward. So we launched a jobs board, like you mentioned, Steve, basically aggregating all the exciting opportunities across the venture-backed companies in the space. And I think, with all the layoffs that are happening in the telecommunications industry right now, there's a lot of like really solid talent that, if we funnel them to the right place, can make a big impact on the DeWi space, and we have a lot to learn from them. So that's one. We are creating some analytics dashboards that are not launched yet, but I'm super excited to launch in the next couple of weeks. Basically, creating I think the crypto community has done a really good job of telling narratives around what matters for their protocols. Like the idea of Ethereum being ultrasound money, I think is like very powerful. Or the, DeFi Llama having like TVL growth, like having a charter front page for that, I think can bring a lot of positive attention to the space. And so we're working on building something there as well. And lastly, we're hosting an event at the end of August, which I'm excited to see both of you guys there, themed around one of my favorite books, the Three Body Problem, or the Dark Forest trilogy. The Three Body Problem is the first book. It's a science fiction book about the Earth basically coming in contact with aliens and all the shenanigans that happened over multiple centuries as that plays out. And so we're hosting an event to bring together a bunch of DePIN founders and investors and writers and musicians and other people, and try to basically come up with a war game or mental model for how can our infrastructure survive a world with an alien invasion. I promise we didn't time it, but it looks like we're actually confirming aliens like literally this exact month. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy times. But one of the core premises of the Three Body Problem is that when you study how human society would react to an alien invasion, it's like all game theory, right? It's like China's going to try to tell their version of the story. The US will send their version of the story. Actually, what happens in the book is that the China sends out the first signal through a huge telescope out, and basically like the history of a CCP centric like version history of the world, and the Earth gets back a message that says, "Do not respond, do not respond, do not respond," with like 3 exclamation points after it. And so everyone's like, "Holy shit! Like maybe we give up our position if we send another message. Like who knows? We really don't, like, we just got this signal out of nowhere. We don't know what's going to happen." Of course, eventually it breaks down, and like every country in the world tries to send their signals and tries to create like backdoor deals with the aliens to destroy their other enemies, and so humanity like ends up turning on each other pretty instantly. But anyways, the point of the event is to get together, have some fun, and discuss like how all the infrastructure, the centralized infrastructure, is so brittle. We're all working on something that's more resilient and can potentially survive these like doomsday scenarios. And so I think making it visceral and just like wargaming it on top of actually prepping in case any of this stuff is real, will just showcase like why DePIN really matters over the next couple of decades.
That's an amazing concept. I can't wait.
Yeah, for sure. I think you tweeted it a while ago, Sal, but I guess it's lighter than an alien invasion. But even in times of like warfare, like I think even in Russia and Ukraine, like the first things to fall in some key areas were centralized like communication towers and 4G, 5G towers. So I think what you're talking about definitely makes sense. Like decentralizing the whole stack and the networks holistically, like give us a chance. And I think that's like an example of a small kind of network state, right? Like we have a community with decentralized wireless XNET coverage. Things go to shit. Like I could have a radio on top of my roof, like empowering my community. So I think I mean, Deep in Summit's going to be really interesting. I think we'll look back in 20 years and be like, damn, this was the first one and we're still building.
We're still alive. Yeah, if the aliens haven't taken over by then.
Yeah.
Right on.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. I'm always down to chat XNET.
Yeah. Before you leave, Sal, one last question in the style of Lex Friedman. What's your advice for young people and just entrepreneurs in general?
It's a big question. I'd say the thing I've learned about from I'm like now 18 months into being an entrepreneur, so probably not somebody to take advice from, but the thing that I've learned is that you have to be like, there's this thing about authenticity. Like I'm a pretty laid back person, and so like authentic for me means doing research and trying to like polish some insight and feel like I have some novel point of view or something to share with the world. Also, you have to be authentic, but you also have to be like willing to change yourself like very, very quickly. It's just like nobody's that good at being an entrepreneur off the back that you can't. I think you have to look at yourself in the mirror and like be able to be willing to redesign everything from scratch. And so for some people, that's I think for a lot of people, actually, just like the level, it's scary how ambitious some entrepreneurs are. Like actually scary to just hang out with them because you're just like, what the fuck is this person eating? Or like what they feed him as a child. And so I think like being exposed to whatever you can do to get exposed to like this level of, it's never good enough. There's always a better entrepreneur out there. And as long as you like have that paranoia, I think in your mentality, and you can, if you don't have a wide breadth of people who are operating at a really high level, you can sort of, reach local maximas pretty easily. And so I think the one thing I did right in my career was be really paranoid about local maximas and get myself into spots where I could hang out with like a really wide breadth of people who are operating at a really high level and figure, see that like there's many, many ways to be successful. There's many, many, many ways to fail. Even the amazing entrepreneurs fail and, in the tough markets or tough times or anything else. So yeah, I'd say balance authenticity, but like also stay true to yourself while recognizing that you might have to completely rebuild yourself. You have to be a shameless motherfucker. Like nobody else is going to stand up for you. Sorry. Like that's just the real world. And if you want to be a venture-backed founder, you have to have an insane level of ambition. Like it just the reality of the math is that you as a founder making $100 million probably means that the company did okay, but not a standout winner for venture investors. Like we're really looking for the people that will look at 100 million and say like, no, I want, 5 billion. I'm going to keep going. And so I think that's specifically if you're trying to take venture capital, it's a different level of just that's more of an asset class question than I think being a founder. But probably the biggest miscommunication that we have in talking to teams is that there's a lot of businesses that we're really impressed with the companies that I think they can build something really special for themselves, but it's just very clearly not big enough for venture scale returns. And that's the job. That's the hard part of the job. You get limited amount of bullets and you have to make a determination on it. And but anyways, for young people and for founders, that's my advice. Try to hang out with a lot of really impressive people. Stay true to yourself and be extremely ambitious.
And be a shameless.
Yes, be a shameless mother. $1 for every time Mahesh told me that.
I think it's excellent advice. Thank you, Sal.